So I'm Thomas Lindsay. I'm Senior Counsel for the Center for Democratic and Environmental Rights. I'm a co-founder of the Community Environmental Legal Defense Fund. For the past 25 years, I've assisted communities to begin to adopt local laws to stop projects and activities that are harmful to them, like factory farms, agribusiness operations, pipelines, fossil fuel infrastructure, things in communities that people know are harmful to them, but don't have the legal authority under the current system to stop them. We work with them to envision what an expansion of rights would look like at the local level: right to clean air, clean water, right of ecosystems and nature to have legally enforceable rights, and then help them understand how the system is set up to prevent those laws from being effective or going into place. So for 25 years, we've done that work. We've worked in courts. We've argued in front of communities on behalf of communities. We've argued in front of courts on behalf of nature and ecosystems. And we basically assist groups every step of the way, from envisioning what's needed to writing those laws, to defending those laws, and working on changing the structure of the state and federal constitutions. And we're talking about the Founding Fathers today and the mythology around the Founding Fathers and the U.S. Constitution. So another conversation that's been difficult to have with people is about the Founding Fathers. And the Founding Fathers have really become a mythology in the United States, that they were the best and brightest people that ever trod the planet. They put together the best structure that's ever been written on the planet. In fact, most people, when they're asked in the U.S., will say that the U.S. is the only country that has a constitution. So there's a whole mythology around the Founding Fathers. But you have to peel back some layers to figure out who the Founding Fathers were. They were of a certain class, and they were all white. And when they came together in Philadelphia at the Constitutional Convention, they actually locked the doors, so no one was allowed in and out. Transcripts of the actual conversations that happened within Constitutional Convention Hall in Philadelphia, were not allowed outside the doors. In fact, the discussions were kept secret for 50-some years until James Madison published his notes of the Constitutional Convention, and he only published them because he was essentially knew he was on his way out, that he was leaving the planet. And so people didn't know what happened within Constitutional Convention Hall for over 50 years after those proceedings occurred. There were no African Americans involved, obviously. There were no women involved. The U.S. Constitution didn't reflect the population at large. Less than 1% of the humans living in the United States at that time actually gained anything by the passage of the U.S. Constitution or the Bill of Rights. So a very small fragment of the population, because of course women weren't persons, African Americans weren't persons, Native Americans weren't persons. Slaves were denoted as 3/5 of a person for electoral representation, but were not recognized as persons for exercise of political or civil rights. And so what the Founding Fathers put together was not something that benefited the vast majority of the population. And many of the Founding Fathers did not trust democracy. They distrusted democracy. And in fact, the American Revolution and the energies coming out of the American Revolution were the only things that held any of the Founding Fathers, or most of the Founding Fathers in Constitutional Hall in Philadelphia, to any plan of governance that reflected any indicia of democracy at all. And so Alexander Hamilton, on the floor of the Constitutional Convention, made the statement that the people were a beast, that the people could not be trusted, and that democracy was all about building these layers so that people couldn't take property or affect the property of others. So you have all those themes and layers that run through the Constitutional Convention. It's unfortunate when we treat the Founding Fathers as the myth, or elevate them to the level that they've been elevated to, because it makes it harder for us to touch the document. Yeah, it makes the document a holy document in some ways, and takes us out of considering in our own minds what it needs, or what it will need, to actually transform that structure of governance into something that lasts us for the next 250 years. I think we, from elementary school on, are just imbued with this concept of America is exceptional, and the exceptionalism comes down to the people who wrote the Constitution, and the Constitution has been around for so long, we ignore the fact that the Constitution made it extremely difficult to actually amend the Constitution to expand rights. It took women 140 years. The suffragist movement was 140 years from the first organized suffrage events through to the passage of the 19th Amendment in 1920. And abolitionists, it took 130 years. So in terms of actually altering or expanding rights within the Constitution, they made it very difficult to do so. And in fact, James Madison has a famous quote in his own notes of the convention in which he said that the purpose of the Constitution was to provide a permanent place for the landed people in the United States so that democracy would be isolated, so that it wouldn't be able to do the things that the vested gentry people wanted to do. And so these folks were very clear, the Founding Fathers were very clear about what system of government they envisioned to be the best. Unfortunately, that system of government envisioned to be the best didn't include 99% of the population of the people that lived in the United States at the time. And there's a famous cartoon about the Founding Fathers in wigs meeting around a table, and African Americans and women on the outside opening up the windows trying to look in to see what was transpiring. But I don't think that's the best model for building a constitution, is to exclude 99% of the people from what actually gets developed. And that property and commerce concepts, that override that we have in the US Constitution of when democratic lawmaking takes place, and it comes in to override that, that was all hardwired into the source code. So the constitutional stuff is the source code, and it was put there from the beginning. So it's not a mistake, it's not an aberration, it's actually hardwired into that structure, which is why it needs to be changed. The structure in the United States is such that democracy is essentially allowed to exist as long as there's an override switch that can be pulled by a relatively small number of people to override what that democratic lawmaking stuff is. So when people at the local level pass a ban on something that's harmful to them, the powers that be, mostly the corporations that are putting the particular project in, kind of laugh because they know that it's a short-term thing. They know if they need to, they can reach into their back pocket and pull out these constitutional levers that then allow them to override what the community has done. So democracy exists until you try to use it. That's the key. So once you actually try to access it and use it, you begin running into these obstacles and doctrines that have been very carefully manufactured over the past 150 years to make sure that that back pocket ace is there to be pulled out to override. So democracy is almost like it's a luxury under this system, which is it's there, you think it's there, but then when you actually need to use it, you find out why you can't. And that can't comes in the form of that override from some of the largest corporations that operate in the world, who are not about to allow a democratic system that interferes with their ability to put gas pipelines in, or frack wells, or agribusiness factory farms, where the system is not set up to allow you to stop those things even if they're harmful to you, because that override exists that can be pulled almost like a backdoor in computer programs that comes in to override whatever the community has done. And as long as that system is that way, we believe that we have a democracy and we defend it, yet the folks in the know who are actually playing on the real game board understand that community opposition is all just noise, and that they can come in and actually override those democratic decisions at any time. Yeah, so the whole system is built very carefully to eliminate democratic control over most of the elected legislative bodies. So in the beginning, state legislatures who were elected by the people, but only the people that were people at the time. So a very thin margin of white males with property. Those are the only ones that had the ability to vote for the state legislatures. State legislatures actually appointed the Senate. So the Senate was not popularly elected. We forget that. It took a constitutional amendment to actually change the Senate to be a popularly elected. But at each gradation of the Founding Fathers' dream about what the structure of the constitutional governance would be, it cross-cuts democratic control at each level by putting control into a smaller number of hands higher up the ladder. And if the legislative process doesn't stop stuff that is interfering with commerce or property, then it goes to the U.S. Supreme Court, and the U.S. Supreme Court, as the court of last resort, then uses property and commerce concepts to actually overturn what's been done at the local level on by using these certain legal doctrines and precepts that have been put in place over the past 150 years. So what that means is that if you want to get something done in the U.S., you have to win at every level. You have to run every gauntlet. You have to run the legislative gauntlet. You have to run the executive branch gauntlet. You have to run the judicial branch gauntlet. You got to win every one. The boys on the other side, however, the corporate boys, only have to win once. They have to pull one of those levers, and as long as one is successful, they win because they get an override by the courts or preemption by the legislatures, or one of those tools is used. But we have to run each one, all of them, because if we're not 100% and perfect, the law doesn't make it through. But on the other side, because the default or the thumb on the balance is property and commerce on the other side, that all the corporations have to do is reach into the Constitution and push a couple buttons, and all they need is one to be successful. So that's why the history of progressive movements, I think, in the United States over the past 60 years has been so dismal, because you have to run a perfect game. You have to throw a no-hitter. If you're on our side, you actually have to throw that no-hitter. On the other side, it's enough just to get one hit, because one hit is enough to overturn and overcome this democratic sentiment. And that's exactly what's hardwired into the U.S. constitutional system, is that default, that premise that anything commerce and property is good. Factory farms are good. Pipelines are good. Expansion of frac wastewater injection wells, that's a good thing, because the law backs the ability of the corporations to put those things in and premises their rights over the rights of the people that live in the community. That's the hardwiring of the system that we have.